Carrie, I asked it on it about her and Carrie. Well, I said I mentioned that they didn't hit it off very well. So, to my surprise, she broke off into a fit of laughter. Didn't hit it off very well, you fool. He is head and ears in love with her. Richard Carey was led in love with her. And it's tearing him to pieces because he worships Leidner too. He's been his friend for years. That would have been enough for her. She's made it a business to come in between them. But all the same, my friends, मतलब रिचर्ड कैरी जो था वो उससे मिसेस लेडनर से प्यार करता था. I fancied, and been, she was frowning himself. I fancied that she had gone too far for once, that she was not only bitter but bit. Carrie is attractive. He's as attractive as hell. She was a cold devil, but I believe she could have lost her coolness with him. I think it's just scandalous what you're saying, I cried. Why, they hardly spoke to each other. Oh, they didn't? Didn't they? She turned on me. A hell lot you know about it. It was Mr. Carey and Mrs. Leidner in the house. But they used to meet outside. She'd walk down the path to the river, and he'd leave the dig for an hour at a time. They used to meet among fruit trees. I saw him once just leaving her, striding back to the dig, and she was standing, looking after him. I was a female cat, I suppose. I had some glasses with me and I took them out and had a good look at her face. If you ask me, she cared like uh, she cared she cared like hell for Richard Carey. She broke off and looked at Pyro. Excuse my butting in your case, she said with a sudden, rather twisted grin, but I thought I'd like to have the local color correct. And she marched out of the room. Mercure Pyro, I cried. I didn't believe one word of it all. He looked at me and he smiled and he said very queerly, I thought, you can't deny, Nurse, that Miss Rayleigh has shed a certain illumination on the case. अब आया new suspicion. We couldn't say any more just then because Dr. Rayleigh came in and saying jokingly that he'd killed the most tiresome of the patients. He and Mercule Pyro settled down to more or less medical discussion of psychology and the mental state of an anonymous letter writer. The doctor cited cases that he had known professionally, and Miss Mercule Pyro told various stories from his own experience. It's not so simple as it seems, he ended. There is a desire for power and very strong inferiority complex. Dr. Rayleigh nodded. That's why you often find that the author of anonymous letters is the last person in the place to be suspected. Some quite inoffensive little soul who apparently can't say boo to a goose. All the sweetness and Christian meekness on the outside and seething with all the fury of hell underneath. Poirot said thoughtfully. Should you say Mrs. Lerner had any tendency to an inferiority complex? Dr. Rayleigh scraped out his pipe with a shackle. Last woman on earth I described that way. No repressions in her about her life. Life, and more life. That's what she wanted and got to. Do you consider it a possibility, psychologically speaking, that she wrote those letters? Yes, I do. But if she did, the reason arose out of her instinct to dramatize herself. Mrs. Lerner was a bit of a film star in private life. She had to be center of things in the limelight. By the law of opposites, she married Lina, who was about the most retiring and modest man I know. She adored her. But adoration by the fine side wasn't enough for her. She had to be persecuted heroine as well. In fact, said Poirot smiling, you don't subscribe to his theory that she wrote them and retained no memory of her act? नो आई डोंट. मतलब पर्यो ने ये पूछा, देखो कि वो जो लेटर्स थे क्या आपको लगते थे कि मिसेस लाइडनर ने लिखे हैं खुद को? अब ये था, एक ये सरप्राइज आई जो कि मिस रेली ने बोला कि जो राइडर था और मिस लाइडनर एक दूसरे को बहुत पसंद करते थे, वो एक दूसरे को 1 घंटे के लिए मिलते भी थे. No, I don't. I didn't turn down the idea in front of him. You can't very well say to a man who's just lost a dearly loved wife that that same wife was a shameless exhibitionist, that she drove him nearly crazy with anxiety to satisfy her sense of the dramatic. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't be safe to tell any man the truth about his wife. Funnily enough, I trust most women with the truth about their husband. मतलब औरतों को तो अपने हस्बैंड के बारे में सच सच बता दो, बट आदमियों को कभी अपनी उनकी वाइफ के बारे में नहीं बताना. Women can accept the fact that man is a rotter, a swindler, a drug taker, a confirmed liar, and a general swine without their affection for the brute in the least. Women are wonderful realists. Women realists होती हैं. मतलब ये बता दो भाई मकार कमीना कुछ भी है, औरतें एकदम एक्सेप्ट कर लेंगे. Frankly, Dr. Ailey, what was your exact opinion of Mrs. Raidna? Dr. Ailey lay back in his chair and puffed slowly in his pipe. Frankly, it's hard to say. I don't know her well enough. तुम्हें क्या लग रहा है? She's got charm, any amount of it. मुझे ऐसा लग रहा है, वो ऊपर से दिखते हैं. Brain, sympathy, what else? She hadn't have any of the unpleasantness vices. She wasn't sensual or lazy or even particularly vain. She was, I'd always thought, but I'm not proof of it, a most accomplished liar. वो झूठी थी. वैसी थी. What I don't know and what I'd like to know is whether she lied to herself or only to other people. I'm rather partial to liars myself. A woman who doesn't lie is a woman without imagination and without sympathy. I don't think she was really a manhunter. Manhunter नहीं थी और partially झूठ बोलती थी. Just like the sport of bringing them down with my bow and arrow. If you can get my daughter on the subject, we have had that pleasure. आप मेरी बेटी से पूछ सकते हैं मिस्टर एनी. बोला हाँ बहुत प्लेजर हो चुका है. उसने बता दिया था लड़की ने. Said Pyro with a slight smile. Said Dr. Ailey. She hasn't wasted much time. Shoved her knife into her pretty thoroughly. I should imagine. The younger generation has no sentiment. Younger लोग हैं, इनको कोई sentiment वगैरह तो है नहीं. वो मर गई है तो उसको भी छोड़ दो, बट उसको कोई sentiment नहीं है. Towards the dead. It's a pity all young people are pricks. They condemn the old morality and then proceed to set up a much more hard and fast code of their own. Interesting. If Mrs. Leidner had had a dozen affairs, Sheila would probably have approved her as living her life fully or obeying her blood instinct. What she doesn't see is that Mrs. Leidner was acting true to type, her type. मतलब अगर मिसेस लाइडनर के खूब सारे अफेयर होते, शीला कहते हाँ लाइफ पूरी चाहिए, पर मिसेस लाइडनर के कोई अफेयर नहीं थे, ट्रू टाइप. The cat is obeying its blood instinct when it plays with the mouse. It's made that way. Men aren't little boys to be shielded and protected. They've got to meet Catwoman and faithful Spaniel, you're still dead adoring woman. And henpecking, nagging bird woman. All the rest of it. Life's a battlefield, not a picnic. I'd like to see Sheila honest enough to come off her high horse and admit that she hated Mrs. Leidner for good, old, thorough-going, personal reason. शीला एकदम पसंद नहीं करती थी मिसेस लाइडनर को. Sheila is about the only young girl in this place and she naturally assumes that she ought to have it all her way with the young things in the trousers. यंग यही है लड़की, उसको लगता है कि भैया मेरी ही चले. Naturally, it annoys her when a woman who, in her view, is middle-aged and who already has had 2 husbands to her credit comes along and licks her on her ground. चबा दिया उसको. उसके पहले भी 2 शादियां हो चुकी, दूसरी शादी, और तुम्हें पीट रही है. तो शीला का दिमाग तो खराब हो गया. Sheila's a nice child, healthy and reasonably good looking and attractive to the other sex as should be. But Mrs. Lydna was something out of the ordinary in that line. She's just got that some sort of a calamitous magic, right? That plays the deuce with things. The kind of Billy Dam sans mercy. I jumped in my chair. What a coincidence is saying that. Your daughter, I'm not indiscreet, has perhaps a tenderness for one of the young men out there. Oh, I don't suppose so. She had Emmett and Coleman dancing attendance on a matter of course. I don't know that she cares for one more than the other. There are a couple of young age Air Force chaps too. I fancy it's also fish that comes to her net at present. No, I think it's age daring to defeat you that annoys her so much. बस शीला को ये पसंद नहीं था कि मिसेस लाइडना बूढ़ी और यंग लोगों को कर रही है वो चिढ़ गई. He doesn't know so much of the world as I do. It's when you get to my age that you really appreciate a schoolgirl complexion and a clear eye and a firmly knit young body. But a woman over 30 can listen with rapt attention and throw in a word here and there to show the talker what a fine fellow he is. And few young men can resist that. Sheila's a pretty girl, but Louis Leidner was beautiful. Glorious eyes and that amazing golden fairness. Yes, she was a beautiful woman. Yes, I thought so myself, he's right. Beauty is a wonderful thing. She had been beautiful. It wasn't the kind of looks that you were jealous of. You just sat back and admired. Yeah. I felt the first day I met her that I'd do anything for Mrs. Leidner. All the same, that night, as I was driving back to the Tel Jamira, Dr. Rayleigh made me stay for an early dinner. One or two things came back to my mind and made me rather uncomfortable. At the same time, I hadn't believed the word of all Shira's outpouring. I'd taken it for sheer spite and malice. पर जो शीला ने बात बोली थी वो इस नर्स लिथरन को बहुत पसंद नहीं आई. वो मान भी नहीं रही थी. तो डॉक्टर रेली ने उनके साथ खाना वाना खाया और बातें की. But now I suddenly remember the way Mrs. Leidner insisted on going for a stroll by herself that afternoon and wouldn't have me here coming up. I couldn't help wondering it perhaps, after all, she'd been going to meet Mr. Carey, and of course it was a little odd, really, the way she spoke to each other so formally. Most of the other words she called them by the Christian names. He never seemed to look at her, I remember. That might be because he disliked her, or it might be just the opposite. I gave myself a little shake. Here I was fancying and imagining all sorts of things. All because of a girl's spiteful out. It just showed how unkind and dangerous it was to go about saying that kind of thing. Mrs. Leidner hadn't been at all like that at all. Of course, she hadn't liked Sheila really. She'd really been almost catty about her that day at lunch at Emmett's, Mr. Emmett. Funny the way he had looked at her, the sort of the way that you couldn't possibly tell what he was thinking. You could never tell what Emmett was thinking. He was so quiet but very nice, a nice dependent person. Now Mr. Coleman was a foolish young man if there was ever one. I got to the point in my meditations when we arrived. It was just 9 o'clock and the big door was closed and barred. Ibrahim came running with his great key to let me in. We all went to bed early at Tel Jamina, Yarimja. There weren't any lights showing in the living room. There was a light in the drawing office and one in Dr. Leidner's office. But nearly all the other windows were dark. Everyone must have gone to bed even earlier than usual. As I passed the drawing office to go to my room, I looked in. Mr. Carey was in his shirt sleeves, working over his big plan. इतनी जल्दी मर्डर हो गया उसी दिन भी काम कर रहे थे हो सकता है
नहीं, ये मर्डर कैसे नहीं, ये तो 2-3 दिन बाद आया है ना।
Terribly ill he looked, I thought. So strained and worn it gave me quite a pang. I don't know what there was to about Mr. Carey. It wasn't that what he said, because he hardly said anything, that and that of the most ordinary nature, and it wasn't what it did. That didn't amount to much either, that you just couldn't help noticing him and everything else about him seemed to matter more than it would have been about anyone else. He just counted, if you know what I mean. He turned his head and saw me. He removed his pipe from his mouth and said, "Well, nurse, back from Hasana. Yes, Mr. Carey, working up late. Everybody else seems to have gone to bed. I thought I might well end up. I thought I might as well get on with things," he said. "I was a bit behindhand, and I shall be out on the dig all day tomorrow. We are starting to dig again." "Already?" I asked, shocked. He looked at me rather queerly. "It's the best thing, I think. I put it up to Leidner. He'll be in Hasana most of tomorrow, seeing to things. Hasana hoga, seeing to things. But the rest of us will carry on here. You know, it's not too easy all sitting around and looking at each other as things are. पूरे दिन बैठे बैठे करते क्या ना, अब जैसी हैं वैसे करो. He was right there, of course, especially in the nervy, jumpy state everyone was in. Well, of course, you're right in a way, I said. It takes one's mind off if one's got something to do. The funeral I knew was to be the day after tomorrow. He bent over his plan again. I don't know why, but my heart just ached for him. I felt certain he wasn't going to get any sleep.
कि आज ही के दिन हुआ है मर्डर?
नहीं, मर्डर तो 2 दिन पहले हुआ था, मतलब द डे आफ्टर टुमारो.
पर फ्यूनरल इतने दिनों बाद हो रहा है?
कुछ होगा, पोस्टमार्टम हुआ होगा ना. If you like a sleeping draught, Mr. Carey, I said hesitatingly. He shook his head with a smile. I'll carry on nurse, bad habit, sleeping draughts. Well, good night, Mr. Carey, I said. If there's anything I can do. I don't think so. Thank you, nurse. Good night. Terribly sorry, I said, rather too impulsively, I suppose. Sorry, he looked surprised. For everybody. It's also dreadful, but especially for you. For me? Why for me? Well, you're such an old friend of them both. I'm an old friend of Lightness. I wasn't a friend of hers particularly. He spoke as though he actually disliked her. Really, I wished Miss Rayleigh could have heard him. Well, good night, I said and hurried back to my room. I fussed around a bit in my room before undressing, washed some handkerchiefs and a pair of wash leather gloves, and wrote up my diary. I just looked out of my door again before I really started to get ready for bed. The lights were still on in the drawing office and in the south building. I supposed Dr. Leidner was still up and working in his office. I wondered whether I ought to go and say good night to him. I hesitated about it. I didn't want to seem officious. He might be busy and not want to be disturbed. In the end, however, a sort of uneasiness drove me. After all, it couldn't do any harm. I'd just say good night. Ask if there was anything I could do for him, and come away. But Dr. Leidner wasn't there. The office itself was lit up, but there was no one in it except Miss Johnson. She had her head down on the table and was crying as though her heart would break. अब वो ऑफिस में गई और देखा कि मिस जॉनसन बैठी हुई हैं और इस मुकाम पे हैं कि जैसे कि वो रोने लगेंगे. It gave me quite a turn. She was such a quiet, self-controlled woman. It was pitiful to see her. "Whatever is it, my dear?" I cried. I put my arm round and patted her. "No, no, this won't do at all. You mustn't sit here crying all by yourself." She didn't answer, and I felt dreadful, shuddering sobs that were still striking her. "Don't, my dear, don't," I said. "Take a hold of yourself. I'll go and make you a cup of nice hot tea." She raised her head and said, "No, no, it's all right, nurse. I'm being a fool." "What's upset you, my dear?" I asked. She didn't answer at once, then she said, "It's all too awful." बहुत खराब है. "Now don't start thinking of it," I told her. "What's happened has happened and can't be mended. It's no use fretting." जो हो गया सो हो गया, अब रोना बंद करो. अब मिस जॉनसन का भी तो मन था ना कि मिस्टर लाइडना से शादी कर ले. She sat up straight and began to put on her hair. "I'm making rather a fool of myself," she said in a gruff voice. "I've been clearing up and tidying the office. Thought it was the best to do. And then something, it all came over me suddenly." "Yes, yes," I said hastily. "I know a nice strong cup of tea and a hot water bottle in your bed is what you want." And she had them too. I didn't listen to any protest. "Thank you, nurse," she said, when I when I'd settled in for a bed, and she was sipping a tea and hot water bottle in it. "You're a nice, kind, sensible woman. It's not often I make such a fool of myself." "Oh, anybody is liable to do in a time like this," I said. "What with one thing and another, the strain and the shock and the police here, there, everywhere. Why, I'm quite jumpy myself," she said slowly in a rather queer voice. "What you said in there is true. What's happened has happened and can't be mended." She was silent for a minute or two and then said rather oddly, I thought, "She was never a nice woman." Well, I didn't argue the point. I always felt it was quite natural for Miss Johnson and Miss Leidner not to hit off. I wondered if perhaps Miss Johnson had secretly had a feeling that she was pleased Mrs. Leidner was dead and that she had been ashamed of herself in that thought. I said, "Now go to sleep and don't worry about anything." I just picked up a few things and set the room to rights. Stockings over the back of the chair and coat and skirt on a hanger. There was a little ball of crumpled paper on the floor where it must have fallen out of a pocket. It was just smoothing it out to see whether I could safely throw it away when she quite startled me. "Give that to me." I did so, rather taken back. She called out so presumptuously. She snatched it from me, fairly snatched it, and then held it in the candle flame till it burned to ashes. तो एक बॉल ऑफ पेपर था, मिस जॉनसन ने खरीदा और उसको कैंडल में जला दिया. क्या था उसमें? As I say, I was startled and I just stared at her. I hadn't had time to see what the paper was. She'd snatched it so quickly. But funnily enough, as it burned, it curled over towards me, and I just saw that there were words written in the ink in the paper. It wasn't till I was getting into bed that I realized why they'd looked sort of familiar to me. It was the same handwriting as that of the anonymous letters. Was that why Miss Johnson had given away to fit of remorse? Had it been all along, had it been her all along who had written those anonymous letters? चलो कल्पना.
ठीक है. अपू ये मैं प्लेट ले जाते.